Today was great. It was a great turnout. We would like to acknowledge Bruce Kaufman's presence here today. Bruce is from CFRC, and he's recording today's readings for his show Finding a Voice. And so we're hopeful that all goes well with the recording. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Romney.
One of the pleasures of running a bookshop are the people that you meet and the connections you make. And I first met our readers today, Kevin Bushell and Harold Hofel. I like to think over 10 years ago.
Close,
yeah. They've been annual visitors to our shop for that long. And we've had other encounters with them. We've met up with them in Montreal and followed their careers. And my first reader up today will be Kevin. Kevin is probably best known for his contributions to literary periodicals like Exile, Prairie Fire, and he works as an English professor in Montreal. So please welcome Kevin Bushell.
Thank you, Robert. I have to say this is a bit of a dream of mine. As Robert said, my parents actually just lived in Roblin until fairly recently, and so I've spent quite a bit of time in this bookshop, and I know that there's a reading series, and I wanted to read here for some time. So this is a pleasure for me, so thank you, Robert and Laurie, for hosting this, and thank you for showing up. It's amazing you get a bigger audience at a poetry reading in Tamworth than in Montreal. I'm going to read from a completed manuscript, a completed but yet unpublished manuscript. It's still looking for a home. It's titled Birdmen. It studies flight, and specifically early flight, early human flight, so around turn of the century. The Wright brothers, other early aeronauts. There's a long poem on aerodynamics, and then a fourth section on other aspects of flight as it applies to our lives. Margaret Atwood once said that all the gods can fly because we can't. But of course now we can, right? Because of our technological prowess, we can fly. And so while some people might argue that the computer is probably the most important tool of the modern era, I think that for symbolic reasons the airplane is the more important tool. So I was interested in studying this period of human history, this juncture when we became, in a sense, godlike. So I'd like to take you today on a bit of a time travel. We're going to start in 1897. Wilbur Wright has just started to study the so-called problem of flight. That's how he referred to it. And the interesting thing about him is that he knew almost right away from studying birds that he needed to control all three axes to fly. Up until that time, people have been thinking of the plane as a kind of a ship in the air with a rudder. You steer with the rudder, and he knew right away you need to also roll the plane. So he developed this technology using a series of pulleys and cables to twist the wings. And he coined it wing warping. That's the title of this first poem. To learn how it's done, I watch the birds. Aeronautic old hats. How they twist one wingtip up and one down in a how do you do wave goodbye. Turning their backs on us because they can. I spend months perusing Pettigrew's Animal Locomotion and Mari's Animal Mechanism. White, many-feathered wings spread wide across my desk. When I've had enough, I hop on my bike and go like hell, bent low over the handlebars, banking hard through turns to feel the pull of all three planes in one sweeping arc. But oddly, it's here in the shop I find my answer, idly playing with an empty inner tube box, thinking outside it might be a biplane held in both hands. How one corner goes up when one goes down. A simple twist to unlock the secret of human flight. In the copyright trials that he got involved in later in life, he testified, he said at one point, that was the secret of human flight, it's just figuring out that bit. We're going to jump forward to around 1900. He's developed a glider. He's going to test. He's scouted his territory. He's going to go down to Kitty Hawk. He looked at some weather brochures. He knows there's lots of wind down there, lots of sand. Kitty Hawk is on the Outer Banks, which is like a sandbar on the eastern seaboard of North Carolina. He's 33 years old. He's never been outside of Dayton, Ohio, except once to St. Louis for the World Fair. So he's going on the adventure of his life. And he gets down to Elizabeth City, and today there's a bridge that takes you across, but he has to rent a boat to get across with his plane. Crossing the Albemarle Sound. The first lesson in applied aerodynamics happens not on the glider, but aboard Israel Perry's schooner. Nightfall as we head off out of the mouth of the Pasquotank into the Sound. Israel, uneasy as the sea leaps into the gathering breeze, suddenly shifts to southeast and builds to gale. The large cabin strikes the headwind flush, and soon we are soaring, static in the onrushing air, the sea pounding the hull from below. A gust tears the foresail from the boom with a roar, but I gather it back as the boat pitches and rolls in the dark, drifting closer to the rocky shoulder of the lurking shore. Israel decides to round the point, but before we can reach the light, another gust rips the mainsail free, and now we must run the sandbar with nothing but a jig, hope the flat bottom will clear, as waves break over the stern and swamp the deck. I don't know how Israel is able to turn in such a sea without capsizing, but he does, and we find shelter in the channel for the night. I collapse on deck exhausted, drenched by the sea, and dream not of flight but falling, tumbling down toward a darkness, black as night, but without sky, without air. Now we're going to jump back about a millennium, believe it or not. The first recorded flight, a glide, was done by a monk, Brother Aylmer of Malmesbury, in around 1000 AD. And he actually had two claims to fame. One is that he did the first recorded glide, but if that were not enough, he was also the first, apparently, to see Halley's Comet in 1066, which at that time was interpreted as sort of forecasting the Norman conquest, so it was a bad omen. And he saw it actually twice, once when he was 5, and then once when he was in his 80s. This is called the Flying Monk, and the epigraph is from his journals when he sees it the second time. Thou art come, a matter of lamentation to many a mother art thou come. I have seen thee long since, but I now behold thee much more terrible, threatening to hurl destruction on this country. He looks pretty silly in his bird costume, perched on the Abbey Tower, a public spectacle better than circus sideshow. With unorthodox wings strapped to arms and legs, he climbs onto the parapet, steadies himself in the gusting Wiltshire wind. 150 feet below, a crowd sways and cheers. They want to see a death. But to him up here, it sounds like jeers. Even the jackdaws mock him with their endless circling, curious yet wary of this other winged thing. He's thought about this for years, the minutiae of every moment, so now, as he utters a final prayer, It's almost familiar, like déjà vu or remembered dream, as if this were not him, his body, his death. How else could he do it? Arms outstretched, he inches forward, feeling the wind, then folds one wing over to cross himself, a gesture mistaken below for a wave. But his eyes are fixed on the horizon as he waits for the wind to steady, then leaps. The crowd gasps and bolts as he plummets toward them, an enormous bird of prey with wings pinned wide and back. His eyes tear, nostrils flare, his mouth opens, but he chokes on his own cry. 50 feet straight down the abbey wall he drops, before leveling off in the downward arc of the high trapeze. Clears the wall, then a tree, then another, heading for the river. 600 feet before speed and lift and nerve leave him stalled, flapping like an overgrown fledgling. He hits the embankment to the sound of snapping ash and bone, but lives to tell how he should have had a tail. He'll hobble lame through the abbey's hallways well into his 80s and be the first to see the ominous tail of Halley's Comet arc through the heavens. It's true, he thought that was his downfall, he should have had a tail. Part of what inspired me with these poems is just the sheer courage of some of these men. I mean, to be able to do that, just from studying the birds around the abbey, developing these wings, and then having the confidence and courage to jump from the wall like that. Probably the most celebrated French aeronaut was actually an expat Brazilian named Alberto Santos Dumont, and he was one of the first inventors of the airship, which is kind of the precursor to what we know today as the Goodyear blimp. And he had one that was his favorite, and he flew it around Paris, and it was a regular sight. So this is called The Life of Alberto Santos Dumont, a tragedy in 2 acts. Who says elephants can't fly? His did, all over Paris, a regular sight, tethered patiently over the Champs-Élysées while he took his morning coffee, and above the Bois de Boulogne as he paused for an afternoon apéritif. His story could rival a Hollywood movie, especially the part where he walks out onto the keel of his airship without safety lines or parachute, makes the repairs, and wins the Archdeacon's Prize in a real nail-biter. He even splits the award between his mechanics and the city's beggars. Great stuff. It could also be a Jules Verne novel like he read in his boyhood Brazil, a fast-paced plot filled with close calls, like when he beat out the onboard fire with his straw hat, or was rescued from a window ledge of the Hotel Trocadero, or when he crashed into the Rothschild estate, only to be greeted by the butler serving drinks and snacks. It could almost be a comedy. The dapper, quirky, superstitious little man makes big in Paris, wooed into the highest social circles, except for the ending. The man with the agility of a cat develops multiple sclerosis, retires from flying, turns melancholic, and burns all his papers, blaming himself for air warfare. At his homecoming, a plane filled with dignitaries makes a pass and bites it in the harbor. He calls off celebrations to search in vain himself. In the final scene, civil war breaks out. He learns of Brazilian bombing Brazilian, and the happy-go-lucky guy is found tethered by the neck, a death so shocking it makes peace. It was such a national hero that it actually prompted a ceasefire, which morphed into a peace treaty. Now we'll jump forward to our time. This is a prose poem. If you've ever wondered how flies land on the ceiling, you've come to the right place. There were a couple of working theories. One was that they kind of do a barrel roll last minute and land this way. The other one was that they kind of fly up on an angle and touch through their front feet and then flip onto their back feet. And through high-speed photography recently, they've managed to figure out it's actually kind of a combination of both. So that's my springboard, my starting point for this poem. Fly dying on the bedroom floor. You who can cartwheel onto the ceiling. You who can dig from standstill the swatting hand or newspaper. You who can turn verb into noun through feats of flying cannot, for the life of you, fly now. I hear your distress, a buzz roll on the hardwood, and recognize in its rhythm of fits and pauses a plea for three-dimensional space. When it weakens, it becomes the snore of my sleeping shadow self, the one who wants to fly, to be flying, to be dark, diseased, dangerous. Is this your song? The punk version of Flight of the Bumblebee? Unplugged, but amplified by the dark, it could be the perfect accompaniment to a panic attack, night terror, or the dream in which I can't remember my name. I imagine you, probably caught under the curtains, spinning on your back like a manic breakdancer. Or perhaps you are carving geometric shapes, figure skater on amphetamines, wearing a costume woven entirely from hair. This must be the long program, the one in which you eventually die of exhaustion at the end of a blinding spin, striking a pose, legs extended in the air, on the final note for eternity. If my dog were here, he would reincarnate you as worm in his stool. You would become intimate with his entrails. He would lift you clean from the floor and deposit you at the park. But he has preceded you to that place you are going, and now that you have reminded me of this sadness, musca domesticas, I want you out of my house. I want sleep to knit the sleeve of care you have unraveled with your spinning. I will put an end to this, even if I must heave myself from bed and hunt, bare-assed on all fours, for what's left of you. And I have to have a poem on the Frisbee. The fourth section of the manuscript's kind of got poems about birds, bats, boomerangs, Frisbees. Some interesting trivia you learn as you do this kind of research. There's actually been more Frisbees sold in North America than footballs, baseballs, basketballs combined. It's pretty impressive. The ancient Greeks had the right idea, but wrong technique. Why the whirling dervish when a flick of the wrist will do? That's all it takes when your discus is a wing with a 360-degree airfoil. The first to figure this out were some truckers whose boredom at the docks was the mother of their invention. A pie plate turned into a toy that turned into the flying saucer that turned into the Pluto platter that turned into the Frisbee, named after the baker whose pie plates became toys for bored truckers. Is it more fun to throw or catch? Maybe it's the moment in between, when the wind, the invisible third, plays as well, and we become audience. Watch it hold its breath, the whole note rest, or send the Frisbee up and down the scales in a kind of jazz for the deaf. When it hovers, floats down and lights upon your finger, you think of the hummingbird you're trying to tame, the trick with the spinning basketball you've always wanted to do. But the most fun comes oddly from the errant throw, the one that makes you run and leap, and for a moment you are airborne too, stretching to meet the frisbee. When it comes to you, at the apex of your own arc, that the toy is really air, a play space equal only to water that lifts and carries us elsewhere. And I think I'm out of time, but I'd like to read one more with your indulgence. It seems it's not part of the manuscript, but it's appropriate for the occasion. Harold and I have been coming out here about 7 years running now. It's a kind of a pilgrimage we do. We become Purdy pilgrims. It started, my parents, as I said, used to live in Roblin, and of course there are all sorts of references to Roblin Mill, Roblin Lake, and Purdy's writing, and we kind of thought, maybe we should try to find out where he's buried and see if we can find the A-frame. So we came out, first 2 years we were able to find the grave, couldn't find the A-frame. With Robert's help, actually, we found the A-frame third year running, and it's just kind of a way that we sort of connect and reconnect and transition from our teacher selves to our writer selves in the summer. This poem has arisen out of these trips. It's called Looking for Al, and it's in 3 parts. The first part's the grave, and the epigraph is his epitaph, which some of you may know. I think everybody here knows what the A-frame is, right? The house that became the hub of Camlet culture in the 70s and 80s. This is where I came when my body left its body and my spirit stayed in its spirit home. This is where we came when we were sick of student essays. 4 hours along the 401 and over a bridge, feeling our way, as poets do, toward a place among the dead, a book titled Voice of the Land, with frogs singing from the pond. This is where we emptied a beer, read his poems, and wondered where the hell the A-frame is hidden. Like the lake that didn't show on our map, was only glimpsed from the road through summer foliage. This is where he pressed his thumbs into the earth and pulled apart a space big enough to plant some words, a place to grow a name and make a meager living. The man who tends this place doesn't read poetry, but loves the land and earns his living from it too, beating back the weeds. He will not stop to accommodate the strangers who have traveled here to remember and reflect in peace and quiet, maybe sit and write, for the light is fading and there is still much work to do. The Quinty Hotel. We wandered in hoping to have that half fart, half horse piss beer Al loved, but the bar was closed. All the chairs were flipped up and draped in drop sheets, the smell of drying paint stinging our nostrils. I tried to find the spot where he might have sat and thought, maybe read and fought that wiry drunk, but no luck or underground sunlight or yellow flowers were found, so we walked back out. Later I read that the sensitive man graced a strip club in Trenton of the same name. Now both are burned to the ground. The A-frame. 3 years, 3 trips, 3rd time lucky. This time we came with directions, but still drove past and arrived at a dead end with 3 barn cats sunning in the last of the light. We figured it must be the lot seemingly empty, obscured by a line of cedars, so we parked and headed down through an opening, more a departure than arrival, leaving behind the town, the road, the car, 2 writers in search of something neither could know or express. We crossed the lawn, followed a walkway, stepped through a lattice arch, and there it was, half barn board, half bird crap, a robin's nest perched on the hydrometer. There was the writing shed, the burnt-out garage, the infamous outhouse with its literati graffiti. The pictures I'd viewed online appeared before me. A young shirtless Ondaatje in a lawn chair, Margaret Lawrence seated on the steps, silver-bearded Shaggy Earl propped against the upturned rowboat, and I had to hand it to old Al. He got it right, taking his $800 and leaving the city to plunge here into poetry and poverty, nothing but time and hard work to build something capable of withstanding Canadian winters and a steady stream of writers on his homebrew. Would it survive another? We cracked a beer and toasted the author, then walked down to the water and looked across to the church spire, still lit by the final rays of daylight. But now a chill had arrived in the air, shadow etched deeper into the bark of the ancient willow, so we turned toward the car. The house had started to recede back into the trees and would soon be lost to us again. But of course, fortunately, the house hasn't been lost. We've managed to save it, and fortunately, we still have wonderful independent bookstores like this one to gather and share and appreciate poetry together. Thank you very much for your attention.